Dan and Amy. Amy, you know why I like talking to Faisal Khan?
Why?
Because he's one of the few other individuals in Chicago tilting at windmills like I am. Faisal Khan, of course, is the CEO of Project 6. He's a former legislative inspector general for the Chicago City Council. Also came to us from New York, where he was inspector general for the City Council in New York City. Served under both Giuliani and Bloomberg, so he knows a little bit about big city politics. And so far with his Project 6 group, since he was ousted as Inspector General because he didn't understand that Tiny Dancer and the City Council didn't actually want him to do any investigating. He was just there to look pretty. He has been responsible for a couple of big moments just in the last several weeks. One, Alderman Brendan Riley's chief of staff resigning because she was a walking conflict of interest. Number two, the federal indictment of Alderman Willie Cochran on corruption-related charges. And he's written a piece in the Sun-Times that's worth a look. 3 things Chicago must do to fight corruption. I assume number 1 is for all the politicians in office to be recalled, but we'll ask Faisal Khan if that is indeed one of the 3. Faisal, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, guys.
Morning. So 3 things Chicago must do to fight corruption. All right. Try and persuade us.
Dan, Amy, it starts with 3 things, unfortunately. It doesn't end at 3 things, but the first thing they should really do is rewrite this entire ethics law. We have one of the weakest, most archaic ethics laws in the country here in Chicago, and it really needs to go. Start fresh, start rewriting it. Don't use aldermen to rewrite the law. Use outside sources, professors, legal scholars, people who know what other places are like, who haven't lived here in Chicago their entire life and think this is normal.
Why is the ethics law so weak? What specifically?
Well, specifically, for instance, there's confidentiality provisions built into it that protect the elected officials of the city. So, in other words, you and I will never know, as taxpayers, who's being investigated for what, and even if they are being investigated and then being prosecuted, you and I will never know what the deal is. Even after a finding is made, we'll never find out which alderman or other elected official was involved in wrongdoing. So what's the point then? Where's the deterrence effect? How does a taxpayer get to know who's screwing them? We'll never find that out.
But
that's one example of it.
All right.
There's also the penalty phase, where the penalties are so weak and so rarely enforced here in Chicago that there's no point having them on the books. Dan just cited the 42nd Ward or Alderman Riley. You know, we wouldn't have known about that had we not done a lot of digging. That was supposed to be reported to the Board of Ethics as a conflict, that Ms. Doring was a lobbyist, yet she was still able to be hired without somebody even raising an eyebrow.
But
so these are the kind of examples we're talking about.
But what about Alderman Cochran's indictment? Didn't that show that it was effective oversight and ethics enforcement?
No, I mean, Amy, we're talking about Mr. Cochran's behavior goes as far back as 2013, at least what we could investigate, and imagine how further it goes back from there. The reality is we, as the Legislative Inspector General's office, were shut down, and we had no resources and no staff, and really made our lives difficult to do our job. So despite that, we were able to get through and find out what Mr. Cochran was doing, but we weren't able to go through regular sources to get that done. We had to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office. With the shutdown of our office now, we don't know who's looking at what at this point.
So number one is the ethics ordinance that needs to be overhauled and toughened up. Number 2, the Chicago Board of Ethics. What has to happen there?
It's got to go. It's simply just got to go and get rebuilt and come up with something much better than what we have now. It is ineffective. It's been known as the do-nothing board for a long time. It doesn't enforce the law. The Board of Ethics were the ones that decided it's okay for aldermen to take tickets to the World Series and other events. They've been doing that for years. We simply don't know how they operate, and we do know that they often try to make things work for aldermen rather than make things work for taxpayers.
And
so they have to go too.
And number 3?
And number 3, basically, we have 5 investigative agencies in the city who do inspector general jobs. 5. As little as 2 years ago, we had 7. They need to be consolidated. We simply don't have the money in Chicago anymore where we can spread it around 4 or 5 different people to do the same job. Let's combine them up. Let's have accountability with one standard, one law, one budget, and go from there.
Let me ask you a question, a global question, particularly with the change in power in D.C. What about doing something in Chicago like the Estes Kefauver hearings back 60-plus years ago that looked into organized crime in the country? What about federal oversight, if you will, or a federal hearing initiated maybe by some members of our congressional delegation in Illinois to look into political corruption as the new organized crime in cities like Chicago and states like Illinois?
I think that'd be great. I think that there's obviously room for that conversation at this point here. We have such a problem. We have such a bad history. All of our governors have gone to jail. So many aldermen have gone to jail. State representatives have gone to jail. Sooner or later, somebody's got to own this problem. And if it's not going to be our local leaders, somebody else has to take over and do that.
Let me ask you, you're a former federal prosecutor. In addition, that's another aspect of your resume and professional background, so you're ideally suited to answer this question. Federal prosecutors in Chicago. When it comes to Chicago and the city council, they take the low-hanging fruit. It's easy to pick off the idiot alderman who takes a $500 bribe for a zoning change, and that's what they've gotten over the last 30 years and 3 dozen aldermen. But the walking conflicts of interest who've enriched themselves to the tune of tens of millions of dollars, like Ed Burke, get a pass. And I wonder if there is some blame to be put at 219 South Dearborn for taking the easy cases, because the real power brokers, the real corruption is complicated to prosecute, and the real purveyors of it are difficult to get. And so they pass on the difficult cases to get the easy ones, to get scalps on their wall, rather than trying to change the culture of corruption in this city.
Those are good points, Dan. First, I was a state prosecutor, not a federal prosecutor.
State prosecutor, excuse me.
But I wanted to. Your argument is sound. The concern is obviously that you're right, that we've seen low-hanging fruit come off the tree for a long time now. Now, in the U.S. Attorney's Office, we don't know what they're investigating and what they look at. They do take a lot of time to investigate some of the things that they do. My problem with them, or what I've seen over the years, is that they're certainly more of a reactionary board or a reactionary office rather than a proactive one, as you point out. And that could be for a number of reasons. It could be resources and, being spread thin here in Chicago. But I think everyone would agree, you, me, and all of your listeners, that politics here in Chicago should be priority one. This culture of corruption should be the number one priority, whether you treat it as organized crime, whether you treat it as the number one problem that faces the state. It's got to be right up there. So, and I think we can all agree that there's simply not enough being done about it. And that's why Project 6 exists. That's why I hope we can do some of the things that other places aren't doing. But your point is absolutely sound, that somebody's got to pay more attention to this.
Like Judicial Watch was the shadow attorney general during the Obama years, Project 6 is the shadow prosecutor's office during the ongoing Democrat hegemony in Chicago. He is Faisal Khan. He's the CEO of Project 6, former legislative inspector general for the Chicago City Council. Faisal, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.